friends. We are here today in Luke chapter 20. This is the Passion Week. These are the final days before the crucifixion of Jesus. And it's during the festival of Passover. So they're in Jerusalem, and Jesus is essentially, he's just teaching there at the temple, where the festival is happening. And large crowds are coming around listening to him. The Pharisees come up to him and they say, "By what authority are you doing these things? By what authority are you preaching this wisdom, and by what authority are you casting out demons and doing all of your miracles?" And he said, "I will answer your question, but first you need to answer me a question. And the question is this: by what authority did John," he's talking about John the Baptist, "by what authority did John the Baptist do his miracles and preach his messages?" So they didn't answer him right away. They kind of sat back and they said, "Well, if we say that it came from heaven," he would say, "Well, by the same authority, I do it." And that's the answer that they didn't want. They're communicating with each other and they say, if we say this, then he will say that. But they said, if we say that John the Baptist wasn't from heaven, we're going to be stoned by the people, because everybody agrees that John the Baptist was a prophet. Now, I think through this reading, now we've gone through basically everything in this chapter in the book of Matthew and in the book of Mark. These are very important conversations. They were probably very memorable conversations to the writers and to the people that were around. But they ask him this question, and they conclude there's no good answer here. He's kind of got us in a trap, and so they don't answer him. They say, we don't know. We don't know by which John did his miracles. And Jesus said, well, then neither am I going to tell you how I do mine. Perfect answer. and pretty clever. Now, what's interesting to me about this whole exchange here, and I think it comes out more in Luke than it did in the other Gospels, is just how volatile, how like the people in power, these Pharisees, they thought that they were going to be stoned to death if they didn't agree that John the Baptist was a prophet. To me, that's surprising. I thought that these were guys in high places of power and no one would dare question them. But they're like, no. We would be stoned to death if we said that John the Baptist wasn't a prophet from heaven. So, to me, that's very interesting. Now, it's also interesting, as we look down the list, what's basically happening in this chapter is it's just a bunch of exchanges between the people, because they are all trying to get Jesus. It even says it at the end of this section where he's talking to these Pharisees. They planted a bunch of people to ask Jesus these questions so that they might find some way to cause a riot and have people to sentence him to death. And they actually do that, but not because of anything wrong that Jesus said. Their plan, as far as this is concerned, really just doesn't work. But it's pretty amazing how Jesus kind of gets out of all of it. The next section that happens here is, they basically come up with what I said earlier, that they're trying to get Jesus. They're trying to find a way to catch him up in his words so that they can cause some sort of reason to stone him or crucify him or something. And so they come up to him and they say, should we pay our taxes to Caesar? A very hot button issue at the time, because they're being oppressed by the Romans. And so, of course, a good Jew would never say, oh yeah, of course you should pay your taxes. But Jesus says something, and I love this passage so much, because he says, show me a coin. And they show him a coin, and he says, whose inscription is on this? Whose face is that? And they said, that's Caesar. And he says, well, give to Caesar that which is Caesar, and give to God that which is God's. And they all know what he meant. He's talking about the Imago Dei. That's the image of God. We, it says in Genesis that God said, let's make something in our image. Let's make something in our likeness. So we, as human beings, we have the image of God in us. And so he's saying, go ahead and give these coins to Caesar. My rule as king is not going to be a kingdom of this world. He's saying, give to God that which is God. Essentially, give yourself to God, give your money to Caesar. I don't care about that. So very clever, because it's not what they're asking, but he put something on it that made it just so significant. So somebody else came to him. It was actually a group of Sadducees. And they ask him a question, trying to trip him up again, where they ask about marriage, and they ask this story, or they tell him this story. They said, let's say for the sake of argument, that there's a woman and she doesn't have any children and she dies. And as is the custom, and this was the custom back then, she marries the brother, and the brother dies, and they don't have any children. And then they go to the next brother, and he dies, and then the next brother, and he dies. And there's 7 brothers, and they all die. They said basically when they go to heaven, whose wife is it going to be? Now, the Sadducees bring this up because the biggest difference between a Sadducee and a Pharisee is that Sadducees don't believe in heaven. They don't believe in resurrection. They don't believe in life after death at all. The Sadducees were more like liberal biblical scholars, and the Pharisees were more like conservative biblical scholars. So that's kind of how you might look at it. I know it's kind of a rough definition, but that's about how it is. And so the Sadducees ask him this question, and he says, we're not given in marriage in heaven. He quotes from the Old Testament, and he said, when God speaks, he says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He didn't say, I was the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he's saying there, he is the God of the living, not a God of the dead. I don't know if that seems like a good argument to you. However, it was enough to convince them. They thought it was a great argument. They said, well spoken, of course, yeah. They start to walk away. It says that they didn't dare ask him any more questions. However, Jesus, as they're walking away, Jesus says, look, I've got a question for you. And he says, how could the Messiah be the son of David if he calls him Lord? And he says, David himself even says, my Lord says to my Lord. Now, every biblical scholar back then recognized that David was talking about the Messiah, but he calls him my Lord. Now, this was kind of a big deal back then, because someone younger than you wouldn't normally call them Lord. You would give a lot of honor to your ancestors. But that's not exactly what he's trying to say here. The point that he's trying to make is, he's saying, how could this be true if David is dead? He's saying David wrote this psalm recognizing that the Messiah is his Lord, not that he will be this great person. He's saying, he is my Lord. Even now, he's saying that he's essentially talking about Jesus' eternal nature, but also about David, the fact that he is still alive. Now, where does this bring us? I guess it gives us a lot of hope. I have heard a long time ago about the conversion of Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln had a daughter that died when she was very young. And I'm led to believe, that Abraham Lincoln loved her very much and was very heartbroken for the rest of his life about the death of his daughter. And some pastor came up to Abraham Lincoln and said, would it change anything for you to know that your daughter is in fact alive? And this was a very significant point in his conversion, because he just kept saying, alive, she's alive. I feel like we don't often think of that. We don't often think of the people that have died, that we don't see anymore, that somewhere they are in fact alive, that we can see these people again, that there's hope in life after death. Now, I don't think this is the major point that's being made. The real point is that Jesus is the Messiah, that Jesus is pointing to himself, saying that you can trust in me and you can live forever. But this is great hope. Either way, God died for us so that we can live, and the people that we love, we can be reunited with them. We will be reunited with them. That's great comfort, and something that is so central to Christianity, and yet I feel like we don't talk about it very much. So anyways, that is Luke chapter 20. I hope you have a great day.